Hey, it's Coach Anderson here from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online, U.S. History from 1877 to present. We've been talking about Unit 10, World War II. Remember we said we're going to take World War II, of course, and divide it into two parts, Part 1 and Part 2. We're going to change it up a little bit on you again, and what we're going to do, of course, is look at Lesson 4, the final arsenal of democracy. Now, when we're talking about the United States of America, we, along with myself and then the PBS Learning Media, what we try to do is give you some insights in terms of why the United States of America at the beginning of the war chooses to remain neutral and chooses the policy of isolationism. But we also try to give you some insights about how the United States of America started to evolve into a country that started to take sides. And the side that we took, of course, was Great Britain's side or England's side. And the reason being is because you have to understand, at one point the United States of America was a colony of England, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. So we do have some ties here, and then we have some ties, of course, to these nations, of course, that are involved in the war. So you can kind of see how the United States of America be a little concerned. Now, we did talk briefly about something called the Lend-Lease Act. And what we said the Lend-Lease Act did, of course, is it allowed the United States of America, of course, to rent equipment to nations like Great Britain, of course, and the Soviet Union, or any nation that was fighting, of course, against the authoritarian rulers like Hitler and Mussolini, and then Hirohito and Tojo, of course, in Japan. But what we're going to talk specifically about, like I said, we're going to change it up just a little bit, and what we're going to do is look at a primary source in terms of, something that was written about the Lend-Lease Act, and what we're going to do is examine that a little bit and see what conclusions we can draw based on what we see here. So what we're going to do, of course, is a primary source analysis. And what we want you to do, students, is read the excerpt from FDR's Arsenal of Democracy speech and answer the reflection questions which follow that speech. We will then discuss the question and review possible answers. After hearing everyone's reflections, students will be asked to defend a position in support or against the U.S. providing Lend-Lease aid to Stalin and the Soviets. And students will be provided a rubric to write a 3-paragraph essay making that particular argument. So our task here is going to be twofold. The first task is going to be go through and read, of course, this primary source or this speech, of course, that was given by FDR, then respond to what we've asked you to respond to in terms of the question that's related. And then the second part, of course, is going to write an argumentative essay, choosing a side in terms of the U.S. giving support with the Lend-Lease Act or, to the Soviet Union. What we're going to do, of course, is look at the Arsenal of Democracy, and we're going to attempt to read over this with you. And what it basically says is, my friends, I have said this before, but I shall say it again and again until it is known and understood by every American. The United States is in a position of having to make a choice between isolation and involvement. We are faced with the terrible reality of a world war that threatens the very essence of democracy itself. In this hour of peril, when the dark forces of totalitarianism threaten the world, we have an obligation to stand with those who fight for freedom and democracy. This is not merely a question of military supplies, but our fundamental values and the preservation of our way of life. Our production capacity must be mobilized to meet the needs of the allied nations. Our factories must become the arsenal of democracy by producing the necessary weapons and supplies. We can help ensure that the democratic nations can hold the line against tyranny. We must recognize that our own security and the security of our democratic ideals are inextricably linked to the outcome of this global struggle. If the Axis powers were to triumph, the very essence of freedom and democracy would be at risk. The American people must understand that while we are not yet at war, our support for the Allies is vital for the preservation of peace and democracy. This is not just a matter of policy, but of moral duty. In this crucial period, let us be steadfast in our commitment to help those who are fighting for the same principles that we cherish. By becoming the arsenal of democracy, we contribute not only to the immediate struggle, but to the ultimate victory of freedom over oppression. That's some pretty strong language there. And when you read that, it kind of gives you, if you have any kind of patriotic bone in your body and you're reading that, of course, and you're listening to what FDR is saying, he's saying, look, guys, we can't afford not to be involved in this here. If you value freedom, if you value democracy, we have to take a stand and we have to get involved. And that means more than just giving our support in terms of looking at money and supplies. We have to start giving our support in terms of looking at Americans getting involved in the actual combat of this war. Now, even with all those great words in 1941, when he makes this, when we signed the Lend-Lease Act, there are still Americans, of course, that are resistant to the U.S. involvement, of course, in World War II. So, in looking at it, World War I taught us a lesson. We knew we couldn't stay out of this conflict because we knew eventually something would happen to bring us into it. And Lord knows that's what happens. What we want you to do, of course, is look at these two questions. The first question is, how does the speech reflect FDR's commitment to internationalism? And remember what we said about internationalism. It was a belief that the United States of America had a role to play on the international stage. In other words, it was a belief that the United States of America could not just take and isolate itself from the rest of the world. We had to be involved. The second question said the speech by FDR reflects his support of democratic nations through a totalitarian nation, though a totalitarian nation, the USSR, will receive aid also. Would you argue for FDR's support of the USSR or against the support of the USSR? What we want you to do is to take about 30 minutes, go through, look at those particular questions, and in a few moments, well, after the end of that 30 minutes or so, we'll come back and we'll look and see what viewpoints, of course, that or some of the points, of course, or reflections that you were able to, of course, arrive at. Well, you should have had some time that you were able, of course, to go through with the 30 minutes that we gave you, of course, to look at and reread the speech yourself and answer those two questions there. And this is, how does the speech reflect FDR's commitment to internationalism? Well, what I did is when I started looking at it, when this idea of internationalism comes up, what I started thinking about is every sentence in this particular speech where he's basically talking about the United States of America, stepping out of his role, here in the United States of America and getting more involved. And if you look at it, he says, we are faced with the terrible reality of a world war that threatens the very essence of democracy itself. Well, the United States of America is a democracy. And what he's basically saying is that democracy is threatened. So if democracy is threatened in Europe, then doesn't that mean that it's threatened in the United States of America as well? And does the United States of America have a responsibility, of course, to defend democracy wherever it can? Well, I think that idea of internationalism suggests in his mind that it does. And look at the second part, it says the speech by FDR reflects his support of democratic nations through a totalitarian nation, the USSR, would also receive help also. So the Soviet Union, or Russia in this particular case, is no different in the minds of most Americans than Hitler in Germany, Mussolini, of course, in Italy, Francisco Franco, of course, in Spain, and even Hirohito and, of course, Tojo in Japan. So why are we giving aid to the Soviet Union? Well, it's a classic statement again. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Soviets were engaged in the fighting of the war, of course, against Germany and against fascism and Nazism with Italy. So why wouldn't the United States of America give them aid? Because basically, the agenda for both the United States of America and the Soviet Union, of course, was to end the aggression from Italy, Japan, and Germany. And you have to also understand this. Germany is on Russia's western border, and Japan is on Soviet Union's eastern border. Something to be thinking about. These are some of the answers that you should have come up with. The question says, how does his speech reflect FDR's commitment to internationalism? FDR's speech throughout links the success of allied nations fighting against authoritarianism to the absolute survival of the United States of America and democracy. He's basically saying that if we don't do what we can to protect democracy there, we're going to eventually have to do something to protect it here. He states that it is the moral duty of the United States to defend democracy around the world. And the speech by FDR reflects the support of democratic nations, though a totalitarian nation, the USSR, will receive aid also. How would you argue for FDR's support of the Soviet Union or against his support of the Soviet Union? Though communist and also a threat to in the minds of many, FDR also believed that anyone against Hitler, Hirohito, Tojo, Mussolini, were aligned with the democratic cause. And once again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Now, Great Britain. Now, Great Britain's a special case. Once again, the United States of America had been a colony of Great Britain. We have the same language. We have a lot of the same customs. The United States of America and Great Britain, of course, fought, of course, in World War I together on the same side. So we recognize that when the war does come to our shores, we would more than likely, of course, enter the conflict, of course, on the side, of course, of Great Britain. So when we look at that early Lend-Lease aid, you know, in order to bolster Great Britain, because you remember now, France had already been defeated, the Soviets were in disarray, and Great Britain was being bombed the stew out of course, by Germany. So Great Britain is the only thing that's basically left. History goes a long way, as I said. The U.S. giving aid to Britain wasn't a stretch. As a colony of Britain or England, the U.S. had a kind of kinship with Britain, and the Lend-Lease Act highlights that relationship. The U.S. gives aid to the Soviet Union, but that was just a price we had to pay to help save Britain from Germany. Okay? So Lend-Lease aid goes to, and the United States becomes the arsenal of democracy, not only for a nation that we have some affinity for, but also for the Soviet Union, a nation, of course, that will emerge after the war as our #1 enemy in the world. All right, the second part of what we wanted you to do, of course, is write an argumentative essay on Lend-Lease. We want you to choose a position, state what that position is. Now, we gave you a choice now. You can decide in terms of looking at Russia, were you for helping Russia or not helping Russia. Make 3 substantive arguments in support of your position. Conclude the essay with a brief closing statement which ties your argument together, and use a rubric that we provided to guide your essay construction. And this is a rubric, and once again, it'll be at your disposal. And you should use it, of course, to guide your thought process. All right, once again, this is Coach Anderson from from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online, U.S. History from 1877 to present. And what we try to do, of course, is to give you some insights about the United States of America as the arsenal for democracy. And what we wanted you to do, of course, is to see why the United States of America made the decisions, of course, that it made. And we hope that we were able to give you some good insight. But once again, though, it's U.S. history, which means it's your history. You can draw your own conclusions. So do your own research, draw your own conclusions, and we will see you next time here at Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online.